A hacker sits at his computer, clicking wildly at the keys. On the monitor, lines of code fly by. He presses a key triumphantly, and his screen goes black. When the screen lights back up, Choo Choo Charles is grinning at the hacker. Like Samara in The Ring, Charles's face slowly begins to push out of the screen and into the room. The hacker screams. Aranirum Island and its dark secrets had attracted all sorts of attention over the years. Tourists, skeptics, and monster enthusiasts came from all over to visit the little island and seek out the monstrous train that lived in its abandoned mining tunnels. So it was only a matter of time before Choo Choo Charles attracted the attention of an entity a bit more powerful than an amateur ghost hunter. After confirming that the rumors of a giant train creature were true and not just a legend, a secret government organization set its sights on Choo Choo Charles. They put together a specialized task force of 3 agents with years of experience tracking and containing monsters for the organization. The task force was deployed to the island with a simple, important mission: capture Choo Choo Charles and bring him in, alive, by any means necessary. The agents arrived at the island on a sleek private helicopter that touched down after dark in a clearing near the mines. They'd been equipped with the latest in government-funded monster hunting technology, including high-tech tranquilizer guns and a train-sized net made from an unbreakable lab-created fiber. They were outfitted with light, breathable armor, specially engineered to be strong enough to withstand bites from a creature with massive, sharp teeth, as well as the impact of blows from Charles's signature spider legs. Agent 1, Agent 2, and Agent 3 descended into the mines, searching the dark tunnels with the most powerful flashlights their organization's budget could buy. It wasn't long before they spotted the glittering, colorful eggs embedded in the walls of the tunnel. They would come back for those later, but for now, they were interested in the train that had laid the eggs in the first place. They followed the eggs deeper into the mines until they heard the skittering sound of Choo Choo Charles coming to find them. But Charles was used to facing off against villagers and ill-prepared outsiders. Up against the agents and their specialized tools, Charles was unable to gobble them up just like he usually would. The agents quickly tranquilized him and subdued the train monster, trapping him in the giant net and dragging the unconscious machine-based beast back to the helicopter. Within a few hours, Choo Choo Charles had been removed from his home on Aranirum Island and brought to a secret underground laboratory on a neighboring island belonging to the organization. With Choo Choo Charles in the custody of the government organization, it was time for the research team to begin studying him. They kept the creature strapped down in a containment cell, covered with sensors monitoring his functions. The research team wanted to learn everything they possibly could about the creature, from his unusual physiology to the inner workings of his mind. The organization had been studying unusual creatures for quite some time, everything from Bigfoot to the Loch Ness Monster, but they had never seen anything like Choo Choo Charles before. The creature was a mixture of monster and machine that should be impossible, but clearly was very much possible. Charles had a metal body, but he also had internal organs, a heart and lungs, and an enormous stomach for digesting his prey. Most interesting to the team was Charles's brain, and they were determined to get inside of it. Not literally via surgery, instead they developed a way to scan Choo Choo Charles's brainwaves, transmitting them into the organization's computer system. It would allow them to quite literally read the monster's mind. They'd never used the device before, but the researchers could not think of a more fitting first subject than the infamous Choo Choo Charles. The head researcher sat down at his desk and, with a sense of excitement and anticipation, pressed the big red button that would start up the device. The giant monitor lit up as the computer came to life with a series of animated little lines that the researcher immediately recognized as Charles's brain activity. Choo Choo Charles was still sleeping, his brain activity more sedate than it would be when he was awake. At least, that was the researcher's assumption. He couldn't be entirely sure what the inner workings of a trained monster's mind would be like. After all, that was the purpose of this experiment. So far, so good. The device was working. Now, time to begin the process of having the device interpret the thought patterns and translate them into text and images, allowing the researcher to see what exactly was going through Charles's head. While the researcher was waiting for his new computer to sift through the noise of Choo Choo Charles's mind, he was completely unaware of the threat at his very door. At the back door of his computer system, to be precise. While the researcher was preoccupied with the slumbering Choo Choo Charles in the containment chamber, there was a hacker busily working to crack the organization's sophisticated security system. He sat at his desk, littered with empty soda cans chugged as he worked through the night. Just as the organization had been tracking Choo Choo Charles, the hacker had been tracking the organization. He wasn't sure exactly what they were up to, but he knew it couldn't be good. He had almost broken into their system once before, when their operatives had captured a friendly Sasquatch he had befriended in the forest near his house. Ever since then, he had sworn he would break through the various firewalls and blocks and get a look at what the organization was hiding. Once he had done that, he could share the secrets with the public and blow the whistle on their underground projects. The people deserved to know what was going on right under their noses, and with his dedication and computer hacking expertise, he was going to be the one to reveal the truth. With a few keystrokes, he had managed to break through the organization's system. He celebrated by saying every hacker's favorite words in the world: "I'm in." Now, what were these creeps up to? With a nimble series of clicks, the hacker managed to make his way into the computer of the head researcher himself. The researcher would have no way of knowing, but the hacker could see everything happening on his screen. It wasn't any kind of software he'd ever seen before, but it had to be something important. So the hacker cracked open another can of soda, kicked back, and got ready to watch the show. Back at the organization, the device was finished decoding Charles's thoughts. He could see images of dark tunnels, of people running in terror and tripping over themselves, falling to the ground before being devoured alive. The device was allowing the researcher to look through the eyes of Choo Choo Charles. He was looking at the monster's memories. No, he was looking at its dreams. It was incredible, a chance to see the world through the beast's perspective. As the images appeared on the screen, they were accompanied by text that scrolled across them. The researcher spotted words like chase, prey, hunt, kill, eat, chase, chase, chase. Where are my eggs? Save the eggs, keep them safe. Chase, 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 eat. These sentence fragments, he realized, were snippets of the monster's thoughts. The researcher clapped his hands excitedly. It worked. The device worked better than he'd ever imagined it could. Through the observation window, he could see the sleeping Choo Choo Charles rolling onto his side. All of a sudden, Choo Choo Charles sat up, emerging from his deep tranquilizer-induced slumber. As the researcher watched, the train monster turned slowly, tapping his spider legs along the ground until he was facing the window. Charles's gaze met the researcher's, and a chill ran down the scientist's spine at the sight. Charles didn't seem distressed by his imprisonment. On the contrary, he was smiling, a wide, cruel smile. The researcher turned back to his computer and gasped. There he could see himself from the perspective of Charles. But that wasn't the only thing he could see. The text had changed. It repeated over and over again, "I know what you are doing." He heard a sound, like screeching metal, and turned back to look at Charles. His mouth was open, his sides heaving. The monster was laughing at him. All of a sudden, the computer began emitting a series of aggravated beeps, the device working overtime to decode the incredible amount of brain activity it was picking up. Choo Choo Charles narrowed his eyes in concentration, and the researcher heard something in the system pop. He smelled burning plastic. All of a sudden, Charles collapsed, limp. His vital signs ceased, his heart stopped beating. His lungs stopped respirating. It seemed as if the monster had spontaneously stopped all functions with one exception. The device was still picking up brain activity. Confused, the researcher sent an assistant in to remove the sensors from Choo Choo Charles's brain. After all of the sensors had been taken off, the device shouldn't have had anything left to measure. But for some reason, the monitor continued to show activity. Choo Choo Charles's thoughts were still running through the system. Text scrolled across the screen. "Thanks for the help, Doctor." The researcher's stomach dropped as he realized what he had inadvertently done. His team had captured Choo Choo Charles, but the device had given him a way to escape. Not physically, but his consciousness had somehow left his body and entered the device. Choo Choo Charles was no longer in his cell, but instead he had taken over the researcher's computer, acting like some sort of monstrous supernatural virus. He had to act fast, to find a way to keep Charles's consciousness from spreading through the rest of the organization's computers. If Charles escaped the boundaries of the organization's system, there was no telling what sort of harm he could do to the world at large. This would be a Charles no longer confined to the mining tunnels of Aranium Island, or confined to one physical form. He would be able to go anywhere in the world in the blink of an eye. Luckily, access to this particular computer was strictly limited. There was no way that Charles would be able to leave this computer unless some outside force intervened. Unfortunately for the researcher, the hacker had cracked open his security system, and the door to his formerly secure computer was wide open. This allowed the hacker to get in, but it also would allow Charles to get out. The hacker didn't understand what he was looking at, but he and the researcher both watched as the words "Time to go, see you all soon" appeared. Then the screen went blank. As the device apparently crashed, the hacker lost his connection with the researcher's computer, and the researcher rushed to turn the system back on. When he did, there was nothing there. Choo Choo Charles was gone. Had his consciousness been erased when the system crashed? The researcher certainly hoped so, as the alternative was too horrible to consider. Unfortunately, he should have been considering it, because hundreds of miles away in the hacker's room, a strange image appeared on the computer screen. It was a new file on his desktop, one he had definitely not put there, entitled Choo Choo Charles.exe. The hacker knew better than to click on the strange files, but after the weirdness he had just encountered in the organization's system, he just couldn't help himself. Giving in to curiosity, he clicked on the file opening it. At first, the screen just went dark, and the hacker worried that he'd fallen for the oldest trick in the book and released some kind of malware onto his computer. But then, the screen filled with the image of a dimly lit tunnel. He could just barely make out the appearance of mining carts, tracks, and bones lying on the ground. He went to close out of the window, but there was no way to do so, no button to click. He hit a few keys to force a restart, but nothing happened. Instead, deep in the shadows of the tunnel, something moved toward the screen, toward him. At first, all he could see was the silhouette of a train, but as it got closer, he could make out the insectoid legs jutting out of the bottom of the train. And then he could see its face, the lurid red mouth grinning hungrily at him, teeth sharp as needles. The blank white eyes somehow bored into his very soul. The train spider crawled closer and closer until its face filled the entirety of the screen. The hacker leaned back away from the sight in instinctive revulsion, losing his balance and toppling backward out of his chair. When he recovered from the fall and sat up, his jaw dropped at the sight that awaited him. That face, that horrific face, was pushing out of the screen and into his room. It was impossible, he knew that, but he was seeing it with his own eyes. Slowly, as the hacker watched in powerless terror, the monstrous face broke free of the confines of the screen, followed by the front of the train. Bit by bit, Choo Choo Charles emerged from the computer, filling the hacker's room. The desk broke into splinters under the creature's weight, and the hacker scrambled toward the door, knowing that whatever he did, he couldn't let this thing get a hold of him. He wrenched open the door and ran into the hallway, down the stairs, and towards the front door of the house. By the time the hacker was halfway down the stairs, Charles was completely out of the screen. He was in the house, and he was hungry. Smashing the walls into bits as he went, Charles pursued his next meal, chasing the hacker down. The poor man didn't even get 1 foot out of the front door before Charles grabbed him, yanking him back inside and pulling him into the monster's gaping mouth. A chomp, a swallow, and the hacker was gone. But it wasn't over yet. While the hacker was busy running from Choo Choo Charles and questioning everything he thought he knew about reality, a file was sending itself to everyone he'd ever emailed. All across the country, in fact across the world, people were receiving an email from an old internet friend, a coworker, a relative, with an unusual attachment, Charles.exe. When a neighbor came by the hacker's house to see what all the screaming had been about, he'd found nothing but an empty, damaged room and a broken computer. The hacker and Choo Choo Charles were nowhere to be found. The next morning, the hacker's old college classmate was sitting down at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee, getting ready to start work for the day. She noticed an email in her inbox from someone she hadn't heard from in years. The email described his difficulty finding a job in the tech industry and asked her to take a look at his resume for him. She almost didn't click on the attachment, unsure if she wanted to do a favor for someone who hadn't kept in touch, but she decided to click on it anyway. There was no resume when she opened it. No, instead, there was an image of a dark tunnel. In the back of the tunnel, something began to move. Before long, Choo Choo Charles was crawling out of her laptop and into her kitchen, knocking the table over and spilling her coffee across the floor. The woman screamed for help, trying to get away, but like so many others before her, she was no match for Choo Choo Charles. She grabbed the kitchen knife off the counter, slashing at the monster climbing his way out of her laptop screen. But Charles just continued to grin his terrible grin, opening his mouth wider, crawling closer and closer until he could snatch the woman up in his jaws. Just like the hacker, the woman disappeared. By the time anyone came to check on her, she was gone, and so were all traces of Charles except for the destruction done to the room. One police officer who came to inspect the scene remarked that it looked as if someone had driven a train through the place. His partner laughed, before telling him to save his jokes for later when they were off the clock. Back at the organization's underground secret laboratory, the morning shift staff were clocking in and preparing to take over from the agents who had been in the lab all night. Rather than a bunch of bleary-eyed scientists eager to go home and get some sleep, however, the morning shift found a shocking scene. The lab was completely void of personnel, not a single agent, guard, or assistant to be found. But it was clear they hadn't all just decided to clock out early. Something had happened here, and it wasn't anything good. The once pristine and sanitized environment was a mess. Shattered glass and bits of metal and wood littered the floor, and there were garish splatters of blood on the walls. The glass observation window was cracked, as if something heavy had been thrown against it from the outside. Inside, the lifeless body of Choo Choo Charles lay on its back, spider legs pointed stiffly up in the air. In the main area of the lab, equipment was destroyed left and right, smashed to bits. Chairs were flipped over or even crushed. Most notably, the researcher's brand new computer outfitted with the brain-scanning device he had been so proud of was destroyed. It wasn't just broken like the rest of the equipment, however. The screen had been torn apart, as if from the inside, glass and plastic unfurling outward, like the open petals of a flower, leaving a hole in the middle that something had forced its way through. Somehow, impossibly, something had come out of that computer and into the room. It would take months of internal investigation for the organization to uncover the cause of the incident at its island lab facility and to put together a new task force to handle this unprecedented computer-based threat. But by then it was already too late. Charles.EXE had spread throughout the internet, and there was no corner of the world he could not reach. Still, there was only one corner of the world in particular that he was interested in. Back on Aranirum Island, a young boy was playing a game on his computer. It was late, and he had school the next day, but he had rebelled against his parents' bedtime rules and logged on anyway. While he played, a friend of his in chat brought up the subject of a new game file that he had heard about, one that was supposedly cursed. It was called Charles.exe. Curious and wanting to prove that he was braver than his friend, the boy sought out the file. He found it buried in a post on a forum dedicated to terrifying internet tales. When he launched the file, it didn't look like any game he'd ever seen. There was nothing to do. There was just a tunnel. Bored, he shut the game off and went to bed. He woke up later that night to the sound of something moving in his room. He sat up in bed just in time to see Choo Choo Charles slithering into the room, emerging from his computer. Terrified, the boy covered himself with his blanket. Charles ignored the boy, charging through the wall of his bedroom instead, disappearing into the night. He skittered across the island all the way back to the abandoned mines. With a contented grin, Choo Choo Charles disappeared back into his lair. The organization had tried its best, but no one could keep Charles from his home for very long. Choo Choo Charles had returned to Aranirum Island, and he would never have to leave again.